We like to believe we outgrow our parents the moment we leave their house. We imagine ourselves as free, independent, self-made. But in truth, most of us carry them with us. In our choices, in our fears, in the way we love or fail to love. Carl Jung warned that no figure leaves a deeper mark on the psyche than the mother and father. They are not just people we once depended on. In the depths of the unconscious, they live on as archetypes, shaping how we see the world and ourselves. When these archetypes turn dark, they form what Jung called complexes, emotional knots that bind us to unfinished stories of childhood. A harsh father becomes an inner tyrant who crushes our confidence long after he's gone. A suffocating mother becomes a shadow that smothers our independence, even when we think we've broken free. These are the negative father and mother complexes. Invisible prisons we mistake for personality, fate, or even love. And yet, Jung believed these wounds are not just curses, they are invitations. To confront them is to peel back the layers of our own unconscious, to recognize the ghosts that govern us, and to begin the painful but liberating work of individuation. In this exploration, we'll uncover what these complexes are, how they distort the lives of men and women in different ways, and, most importantly, how healing them can turn inherited pain into the foundation of genuine freedom. Most people believe they are in control of their thoughts, that their choices are guided by reason, willpower, or personality. Jung shattered that illusion. He argued that beneath the surface of the conscious mind lies a hidden order, a swarm of forces that bend our emotions and decisions long before we realize it. He called them complexes. A complex is not a passing mood. It is a psychic knot. An autonomous cluster of memories, wounds, and emotions bound together in the unconscious. The knot has a life of its own. When touched, it tightens. When triggered, it seizes the individual with uncanny force. Suddenly, a person finds themselves speaking with rage that feels borrowed, or shrinking with fear that does not match the moment. Afterwards, they wonder, why did I act that way? The unsettling answer is that, for a time, they were not acting at all. The complex was. Jung insisted that complexes behave like splinter personalities. They can break through the thin crust of consciousness and dominate behavior, much like an unseen puppeteer jerking the strings of the ego. They do not ask for permission, they erupt, they possess, and in that moment the individual is reduced to an actor in a play written long ago, often in the fragile years of childhood. This is why the parental complexes cut so deep. For no figures shape the early psyche more profoundly than the mother and father. They are not merely caretakers. They are the first gods, the architects of safety or fear, intimacy or abandonment. When their archetypal roles become distorted, when the mother smothers instead of nurtures, or the father tyrannizes instead of guides, the child's psyche absorbs the wound as if it were law. These wounds do not fade with time. They crystallize into complexes, into inner figures that whisper, command, and sabotage long into adulthood. To understand Jung's negative father and mother complexes is to see how these buried knots dictate relationships, ambitions, and even identity itself. And it is also to glimpse the possibility of freedom, that by making the unconscious conscious, we may finally loosen the knot and reclaim the strings of our own lives. The first world a child ever knows is the mother. Her warmth, her voice, her presence, These are not simply aspects of life. They are life itself. To the infant, she is the axis of existence, the source of nourishment and safety, the first encounter with love, and the first image of the universe. Jung believed the mother archetype lives so deeply in the human psyche because she embodies both sides of creation. She is the earth that gives, and the abyss that can take away. Within her lies the paradox of care and captivity, of growth and regression. When this archetypal role is distorted, the result is the negative mother complex. Unlike the inevitable imperfections of ordinary parenting, this complex is not about a few misplaced words or small failures. It is about a psychic imprint so deep that the child's entire relationship to love, comfort, and independence becomes twisted. The mother in her distorted form becomes not a guide into the world, but an obstacle the psyche cannot pass. The negative mother reveals herself in many guises. She may appear as the smothering mother, drowning her child in constant intrusion, never allowing the fragile self to breathe or grow. Or she may be the absent mother, physically or emotionally gone, leaving the child with an unfillable void. She can also become the critical mother, whose voice is a steady drip of disapproval, a voice that echoes for decades in the mind of her child. However she appears, her mark is the same. The mother is internalized as an unconscious figure, and that figure becomes a secret ruler of the adult personality. For men, this often means a fractured relationship with intimacy. Some remain tethered to the maternal figure, seeking women who replicate the suffocating dynamic. Partners who comfort but control, nurture but infantilize. Others carry a hidden reservoir of resentment, recoiling from closeness with women, unable to enter love without also feeling trapped. They vacillate between clinging and fleeing, never able to hold a healthy balance. For women, the complex often takes a more inward form. A daughter of a critical mother may inherit that voice as her own, becoming her harshest judge, sabotaging her confidence, forever unable to feel enough. A daughter of an absent mother may crave closeness and fear it in the same breath, repeating the wound in her own relationships or in her approach to mothering. In Jung's view, such women risk being devoured by the archetype itself, swallowed in guilt, rivalry, and insecurity until their individuality begins to dissolve. No matter the gender, the fingerprints of the negative mother complex are unmistakable. Emotional regression, when a person collapses into a childlike state the moment comfort is withdrawn. Over-attachment, when relationships or substances are clung to like umbilical cords, supplying the illusion of safety. Depression, that dull weight of being swallowed by an inner figure that whispers, "Why try? You will never escape me." Jung often described this archetype as a kind of psychic swamp, green and nourishing on the surface, but dangerous and suffocating if one sinks too deep. The shadow of the negative mother is not confined to psychology alone. It has haunted myth and story for centuries. Demeter's grief when Persephone is taken plunges the world into winter, showing how maternal power can withhold life itself. Fairy tales echo the same truth. Hansel and Gretel's stepmother, the witch who fattens children for the oven, the envious queen who cannot tolerate her daughter's beauty. Across cultures, we meet the devouring mother who clings to her children, not out of love, but out of fear of losing them, consuming their lives so they never live their own. Perhaps the most insidious danger of the negative mother complex is that it can masquerade as love. To remain in her grip can feel soothing, the return to comfort, the relief of dependency, the escape from responsibility. But what is denied in that comfort is freedom. The child who never breaks from the mother's shadow, never fully individuates, never becomes their own autonomous self. Jung once wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent." The negative mother complex ensures that this burden remains chained to the ankles, dragging through adulthood. And yet, Jung did not leave us without hope. He believed the archetype need not remain a curse. Healing begins with the recognition that the mother, however powerful in the psyche, was never the universe. She was a person, flawed, limited, shaped by her own complexes. By separating the archetype from the individual, one can begin to re-parent the self, offering the care, the boundaries and the trust that the original mother could not. In dream work, in therapy, in the slow work of consciousness, the inner mother can be reshaped, not erased, but transformed. She becomes capable of nurturing without suffocating, of withdrawing without abandoning. This path is neither easy nor sentimental. It requires grief, grieving what was never received, grieving the fantasy that the past could somehow be rewritten. But beyond that grief lies something extraordinary, the discovery that the ability to mother oneself has always been present. Within the adult self lies the power to offer the tenderness once denied, the boundaries once absent, the stability once withheld. By reclaiming that power, the individual does not erase the complex but integrates it, turning the devouring swamp into fertile ground. If the mother is the child's first world, the father is the child's first law. He is the figure who introduces boundaries, who says this far and no further, who opens the door from the intimate circle of the home into the wider demands of society. Archetypally, the father represents order, guidance, protection, and the authority that makes growth possible. But when this role becomes distorted, when the father becomes tyrant or ghost, his presence leaves behind not clarity, but a fracture in the psyche. This is the soil in which the negative father complex takes root. Unlike the negative mother, whose shadow often clings in the form of comfort or engulfment, the negative father appears as judgment. He is the cold voice that says, "You are not enough." He is the dismissive silence that communicates, "You do not matter." Sometimes he is the authoritarian who rules with fear, crushing individuality beneath the weight of command. Other times he is the absent figure, a hollow chair at the table, whose very silence teaches the child that they are not worth showing up for. Whether through harshness or neglect, the father becomes not a guide, but an inner tyrant, or worse, an inner void. For men, the negative father complex often manifests as a wound to ambition. A boy raised under a tyrannical father may grow into a man who lives in rebellion, always fighting authority, mistrusting any figure who represents power. Another may spend his life trying to appease that inner father, chasing success not out of desire, but out of desperation to prove himself worthy. Some collapse under the weight of comparison, paralyzed by fear of inadequacy, unable to step into their own authority because the father's shadow whispers that failure is inevitable. For women, the negative father complex takes on a different shape. The father is often the first mirror through which a daughter glimpses her worth in the world of men. When that mirror reflects coldness, rejection, or absence, the wound cuts deep. It may manifest as a pattern of seeking controlling partners, mistaking domination for love. Or it may instill a lifelong mistrust of men, a guarded heart that cannot fully open without expecting betrayal. In either case, the distorted father figure lives on inside, shaping her sense of safety, her independence, and her capacity to trust. The signs of this complex are subtle but devastating. Chronic self-doubt, as though every effort is under the scrutiny of an invisible judge. Fear of authority, where bosses and teachers awaken not reasoned respect, but an almost childlike terror. Self-sabotage, where success feels unbearable because it contradicts the internalized script, "You are destined to fall short." These are not mere personality quirks, they are echoes of the father's distorted presence, now lodged in the unconscious, steering the adult with invisible reins. Myth and story have long known this figure. In Greek myth, we see Cronus, the father who devours his children out of fear of being overthrown. In the Bible, we find Abraham's God testing him with the command to sacrifice his son, a vision of paternal authority that demands obedience to the point of annihilation. Even in fairy tales, the cruel king or the absent ruler stands as the archetypal father who fails to guide, leaving the child in a wasteland of either fear or abandonment. These stories endure because they mirror a psychic truth. When the father archetype twists, it does not teach the child how to face the world. It teaches them to fear it. Yet Jung did not describe these complexes only to name curses. He believed that confronting the negative father complex is one of the most essential tasks of individuation. To heal is to stand before the inner tyrant and say, "You no longer define me." It is to recognize that the father, however powerful his imprint, was not the ultimate law of the universe. He was a man, bound by his own wounds, his own failures, his own limitations. Healing begins with re-evaluating authority itself. The individual must wrestle with the voices of judgment inside, separating the inner father from the actual father, learning to distinguish between destructive criticism and constructive guidance. In doing so, one begins to build an inner authority that is not tyrannical but firm, not dismissive but empowering. This is the true role of the father archetype, not to dominate, but to confer strength, to push the child toward independence, to say, "You are capable, go forth." The work is difficult, for it often means grieving both the father who harmed and the father who never was. But through this grief, a strange freedom emerges. The individual begins to recognize that the father's absence or cruelty need not dictate the future. Authority can be reclaimed, not as an echo of tyranny, but as the voice of one's own inner law. To integrate the father complex is to take up the mantle of one's own authority, to no longer live in rebellion or submission, but in self-possession. The negative father complex, then, is not merely a story of pain. It is also the possibility of transformation. For the tyrant within can become the guide, and the void can become the space where one's own voice is finally heard. In facing the distorted father archetype, the individual is not only healing a personal wound, but also stepping into their own power, no longer ruled by the shadow of a man, but guided by the authority of their own becoming. To speak of the mother and father complexes separately is necessary for clarity, but in lived reality they rarely appear in isolation. Most of us do not carry one wound, we carry an entire constellation of them, each orbiting around the twin suns of mother and father. And like suns, they exert their gravity over the psyche, pulling choices, relationships, and even destiny into their orbit. The combined weight of these complexes is staggering. A man who carries the devouring mother within and the tyrannical father above may find himself torn between regression and paralysis, part of him craving to sink back into comfort, another part convinced he will never be good enough to stand on his own. A woman who grew under a critical mother and an absent father may internalize both scripts at once. A voice that constantly belittles her, paired with an emptiness where encouragement should have been. Together, these complexes create a psychic echo chamber, where love feels like suffocation, authority feels like judgment, and freedom feels like abandonment. The tragedy is not only individual but generational. Complexes repeat. The unlived pain of parents becomes the hidden inheritance of their children. The boy who was crushed by his father's scorn may, without realizing it, become the same tyrant to his own son. The daughter who grew up under her mother's disapproval may turn the same harsh gaze on her child, perpetuating the cycle. Jung observed this with chilling clarity. What is left unconscious in one generation reappears as fate in the next. And yet, the repetition is rarely conscious. The parent does not say, "I will wound my child as I was wounded." It happens through the invisible hand of the complex itself. A father who never received nurturing may withdraw from his children, not because he does not love them, but because intimacy awakens a wound he cannot bear to face. A mother who was once silenced may overprotect her daughter, mistaking her fear of the world for love, unconsciously binding her child in the very net she once despised. The complex, in this way, is less a choice than a possession, a pattern living through us until we dare to confront it. But the ripple does not stop with family. These complexes spill into every corner of adult life. Careers are chosen or avoided based on parental ghosts. Love is pursued, not for what it is, but for how closely it resembles or opposes the original bond. Friendships, ambitions, even spiritual beliefs are all subtly colored by the complex. Many people live entire lives without ever realizing that their choices were less expressions of freedom than reenactments of childhood dramas. Perhaps the most insidious effect of these complexes is that they disguise themselves as fate. A woman abandoned by her father finds herself repeatedly drawn to men who leave, believing it is simply bad luck. A man crushed by a critical mother convinces himself he was born weak, never noticing that the inner critic is not his voice but hers. The complex whispers, "This is who you are, this is your destiny," and because the voice is familiar, we mistake it for truth. Jung's warning was sharp. Until these forces are made conscious, they will continue to govern our lives. They will not only dictate our relationships and careers, but also project themselves outward, shaping how we interpret the world. The authoritarian boss becomes the father reincarnated. The overbearing partner becomes the mother returned. The psyche, in its blindness, remakes the past in the present, over and over again. Yet within this cycle lies the possibility of awakening. To notice the ripple is the first step in breaking it. To ask, why do I always end up here? Why does this feel so familiar? Is to tug at the thread of the complex, and once tugged, the knot begins to loosen. The ripple effects of the parental complexes remind us of a hard truth. None of us begins as a blank slate. We inherit wounds as surely as we inherit eye color or blood type. But they are not unchangeable. The cycle can be broken if one is willing to face the shadowy inheritance head-on. In that confrontation lies not only personal freedom, but the possibility of sparing the next generation from repeating the same fate. If the negative mother and father complexes are prisons, then healing is not a dramatic escape, but the slow recognition that the bars are not made of iron, but of memory. Jung never promised that complexes could be erased. They are woven too deeply into the fabric of the psyche, but he insisted they can be integrated, stripped of their unconscious power, and reshaped into something that no longer rules from the shadows. The first step is awareness. Most people live under these complexes without ever naming them, mistaking them for fate. They believe they are choosing their lovers when in truth, they are choosing their parents, again and again. They hear their inner critic and call it realism, never realizing it is the echo of a father's judgment or a mother's disapproval. To slow down in the moment of reaction and ask, whose voice is this? Whose wound am I carrying? Is to begin the work of liberation. Jung's warning was blunt. Until the unconscious is made conscious, it will continue to direct our lives, and we will go on calling it destiny. But awareness alone does not dissolve the knot. The complex survives precisely because it guards what is unbearable. Grief, rage, longing, shame. Healing requires shadow work. The willingness to turn toward the very emotions we would rather bury. It means facing the anger toward a mother who suffocated or vanished, the sorrow toward a father who judged or abandoned, the shame of still craving their love even after decades of disappointment. These emotions feel like poison, but they are also medicine. Ignored, they rule from below. Faced, they become part of the whole self. From here, the task is to separate the archetype from the actual parent. In childhood, mother and father seem like gods, embodiments of the universe itself. But adulthood offers the chance to see them as they truly were, not divine, not absolute, but human, flawed, themselves shaped by wounds they could not master. To say, "My father was not the law itself, he was a man, limited and afraid," loosens the grip of the inner tyrant. To say, "My mother was not the universe, she was a woman, carrying her own shadows," frees the child within from mistaking her voice for the voice of reality. The psyche, however, does not simply dissolve its need for parental figures, it seeks to fulfill them. This is why healing often takes the form of re-parenting the self. To mend the mother complex is to cultivate the ability to nurture oneself without smothering, to offer comfort without sliding into regression. To heal the father complex is to develop an inner authority that is firm but not cruel, guiding but not dismissive. Together, these inner parents create balance, compassion joined with structure, care joined with strength. In this way, the adult learns to provide from within what was denied from without. Yet no healing is possible without grief. To confront these complexes is to confront loss, the loss of the childhood that never was, the loss of the perfect parents we wished for, the loss of the love that will not suddenly arrive. This grief feels like a death, and in many ways it is, the death of a fantasy that has held us captive. And yet, once this mourning is endured, a strange freedom appears. The longing for gods falls away, and in its place emerges the possibility of standing on one's own ground. In Jung's vision, this is the work of individuation, the gathering of all the fragments, the integration of shadowed figures, the transformation of the inner mother and father into voices that serve rather than sabotage. The devouring mother can become a source of inner care. The tyrannical father can become a source of inner strength. The ghosts remain, but no longer as masters. They become part of the tapestry of the self, voices among many, no longer unconscious rulers, but conscious companions. Healing, then, is not heroic in the usual sense. It is not a clean victory or a sudden epiphany. It is the patient descent into the underworld of one's own psyche and the equally patient return carrying what was once buried. The prize of this work is immense. The ability to live not as an echo of our parents' wounds, but as individuals who have faced the past and claimed the future. To heal the parental complexes is to step out of their shadows and into the light of one's own becoming. It is to discover that the prison door was always open, but that only through courage could we learn to walk through it. We are all haunted by the first gods we ever knew, mother and father. Their voices echo long after their presence fades, shaping our choices, our loves, our fears. Jung taught us that until we face these shadows, we are not truly free. But to face them is to begin the slow work of becoming whole, turning burden into strength and shadow into light. Here at Shadow Loom, we walk that path through philosophy, psychology, art and literature, drawing on every realm where the human struggle has been written, painted and remembered. Each story, each idea, each image is another torch carried into the unconscious. So, if you felt a spark in this journey, subscribe to Shadow Loom. Step deeper with us into the shadows and the symbols, into the voices that shaped us and the truths that can free us. Because the work does not end here, it begins here.